Let's do some politics now. The governing New Patriotic Party has slated June 20 for the conduct of its primaries, contrary to the conventional gathering of delegates at one point organization of the party's primaries. The NPP says this year's primaries will be held at the various electoral areas at the constituency level. The decision was made after a crunch meeting of the party's executive committee Wednesday afternoon. Communications Director of the NPP, Yabuabian Samoa, is our guest. He joins us via Zoom with more on this impending primaries, which is roughly 3 weeks away. Mr. Bobbin, thank you very much for your time here on Newsdays. First, help us understand the voting at the electoral areas and the rationale behind this new measure.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to your listeners. It's basically within the context of observing and actually implementing the restrictions that have been imposed on us by COVID. Before this time, we've lost the deadline because we couldn't really organize ourselves within the restrictions at the time. Now, fortunately and happily, restrictions have been lifted to the extent that perhaps if you work very hard, 100 people can gather in reasonable safety, social distancing, hygienic protocols, and everything else associated with that. So on the basis of that, the party is determined to hold this parliamentary primaries for the seats that have MP incumbents, 168 of them. And the system, in order to fall within the slightly eased restrictions, is that we will vote at electoral area level, where you have combinations of polling stations at about 10 to 12 each.
Is the electoral area the smallest unit in the party?
The smallest unit is the polling station, made up of 5. 5 officials. An average electoral area has between 10 to 12 polling stations. Yeah, so it means you can comfortably congregate those people and have them vote at that level. And you can easily observe the social distancing protocols thereof.
So why not go for the minimum or the basic structure, which is the polling station, where you'd have less of the people congregate, if indeed, COVID-19 is anything to go by?
5 people. The logistics of running an election for 5 people, if you use Adenta as an example, scattered over 147 polling stations. It's a nightmare.
Absolutely.
It's a total nightmare. But if you bring 10 police stations together, 10, 12, you are dealing with an average of 60 people. Within 3-4 hours, they should all have voted.
So we have how many constituencies? Because I know that you held elections for the orphan constituencies already. So how many are we looking at?
168.
168 across the country. What are the modalities as we prepare for June 20 in terms of the vetting exercise, the submission of forms in the first place? Can you run us through that process?
Everything is over bar voting. We would have voted on April 25th, but for COVID. So everything is over. And tomorrow, the General Secretary of the party, Mr. John Boadu, will put out a full list of qualified candidates, the final list of qualified candidates, that is aspirants, those who can contest, to be out tomorrow. So all the processes have been gone through, right through to the end of all appeals processes.
And I know that there were a few areas that you had issues with. There were disputes here and there. Have all those disputes been settled already?
Yes. Tomorrow you have the full list. If there are any outstanding, to be on the list tomorrow.
We know that the president is also supposed to be acclaimed. Why is that, and what is it going to be like? How is this going to roll out?
Yes, it's one of the highlights that COVID has made us miss. But at the same time, COVID has demonstrated how strong a leader the president really is. He has had no challenger in filing his nomination, so he's the sole candidate. And ideally, under normal circumstances, we would have met in a group to acclaim him. But we can't meet, so The National Council, which is the highest decision-making body of the party, has accepted recommendations to accept that he's the sole nominee and therefore proceed to more or less acclaim him by deed. So
how is that going to be done practically?
Yeah, we will find a date where it will be convenient enough to outdoor him, and it will be done. It will be an outdooring of sorts, but not an acclamation to accept him. That has been done.
How sure are we?
I'm trying to make myself clear.
How sure are we that we're not going to run into legal issues just because of COVID-19?
Oh, no, we are not ignoring the basis. That is why I'm saying that the National Council, which is the highest making decision body, has accepted that. The steering committee has made a recommendation to the National Executive Council, which has approved that recommendation. The National Council has ratified it, that he be deemed to be the presidential candidate. He's the person solely who filed. The National Council has that authority to act on behalf of the entire party in that sense. So his acceptance as the candidate is now done. It's been deemed to have been acclaimed by the party. And so now, the next step is to adore him to the public, and a date will be set for that. And
let me remind viewers, listeners, that we are speaking to the Director of Communications for the NPP, who is also MP for Adenta, Mr. Yabwabia Samoa. On the issue of campaigning, once John Boadu announces the list of people who are contesting in the various constituencies, campaigning will start in earnest. What are the guidelines for campaigning for the various constituencies and the candidates?
I think the biggest challenge now is how we campaign in the context of COVID. So every candidate has to think beyond what the traditional assumptions are. You can't congregate people in appreciable numbers, and therefore, what do? I think now we will see the ingenuity of different candidates. But critically for the party, the key essence is that you don't go beyond the restrictions imposed by the national authorities. The party will not determine for anybody how they conduct their campaign, as long as they observe social distancing, they observe the hygiene protocols, and everything is done in such a way as to protect the people who are involved.
I would have thought that you put in some guidelines just to guide people with as human beings we're talking about, so that we are all guided, even though there's the general rules about social distancing and all that about COVID-19. Perhaps the party want to go an extra step to make sure that it really enforces all that government is doing.
Yeah, Roland, beyond the general guidelines, we've always had moral and persuasive guidelines about one's conduct and utterances and respect for the party, not undermining the party in one's campaign, operating within the rules, literally, of self-respect, respect for the party, respect for the national constitution. Those things have always been there. And you sign up and you sign off that you will not go beyond those limits. But we are talking about, if you ask me guidelines now, I believe we are talking about COVID guidelines.
Absolutely.
And essentially, for COVID guidelines, you can't go beyond the self-discipline that's been imposed by the hygiene protocols that we've all been asked to observe. Literally, as long as one protects oneself, one protects the rest of society. And that is something that requires a lot of self-discipline, and we must all observe. If you give rules, it's not a question of policing those rules. The rules now are very clear. If you don't have anything doing, don't step out of your home. That's a fact now. If you have something doing, you're going to campaign, make sure you protect yourself. You have your face mask on. You wash your hands as frequently as possible coming across any Veronica bucket in public. You have hand sanitizer with you. And whilst out there, you're careful not to touch your face and otherwise with your hand. So when you meet somebody you want to campaign to, or you meet a group you want to campaign to, you make sure they are sitting far enough apart, and that you are also sitting or standing far enough apart from them. And I think if we observe these individual self-protective mechanisms, we'll be protecting each other all the while. You can't have any more rules beyond that.
Now, I want us to talk about the election itself. Usually, one of the major challenges that comes up during such primaries is about the electoral roll. People go there and say that my name is not in the register, or this is not what my candidate was given. Is there going to be some form of an exhibition so people can check, their names, so that we don't encounter some of these challenges on June 20?
The party is going to put out the full modalities for the election, but this is a generic matter that always happens. And as we speak now, all identity compiled in albums or registered for each constituency is with the National Secretariat of the party. And it is the National Secretariat as a custodian who hand over those registers or albums, as we call them, in the local parliament, to the Electoral Commission. So every album will be brought to the polling or to the electoral area or the constituency by National Elections Officer from the Electoral Commission. So there ought not to be those difficulties.
Now, in the lead up to where we are now on your primaries, the idea of having electronic voting was considered. I know the party was flirting with that idea. It appears it has been abandoned. Why?
It hasn't come up for any discussion where I've been sitting in.
And so this is not something that you want to consider at all going forward?
Not on air.
All right, Mr. Boabin, also on election and campaigning, we understand that the deputy Maslog boss is campaigning and appears, allegedly, is involved in what people may consider as vote buying. Has this come to the party's attention?
Not where I'm sitting. I'm not aware of it. But now you mention it, I'll find out if there's anything like that happening.
Very well. There are pictures online to that effect where they're sharing some materials and all of that. Maybe the party will want to take this up and look into it.
I'm certain if there's anything going on that's an infraction of the rules, they'll look at it.
Now, I also want us to consider, in the past you have had some affirmative action, as far as your primaries are concerned. In certain areas, you allow women to go unopposed. You also reduce the filing fees for some women in some constituencies. Are we going with that this year?
Yeah, we have already. All that has been done. Like I said, but for COVID, we would have voted by April 25th. And those are matters that come in at opening and filing of nominations period.
Okay.
Which happened way back in March, where women and youth had to pay only half of the required fees. And hopefully, by persuasion, many of the women who are proudly supporting the flag of Ghana in Parliament are likely to be returned to Parliament.
Mr. Boabin, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Newsdesk. We'll be following all the activities leading up to June 20, when you will select the 167 candidates to represent, to contest on the ticket of the NPP come December 7. And that was the Communications Director of the New Patriotic Party, Boabin Samoa.